BranchOut is a nonprofit program with Veritas Education Leaders that was co-founded by Dr. Yushin Wu and Mr. Richard Wang in 2015 and grew from 20 student volunteers to over 150 student volunteers in 4 short summers. Our high school student mentors come from over 40 different schools across 4 states. We started out as a peer STEM mentoring program, working at the community centers, homeless shelters, and country summer credit recovery programs, and have expanded into a community outreach program to promote cross-cultural understanding by featuring community heroes, creating research articles, and organizing career panels. As an award-winning community engagement program, we have received endorsement from U.S. Congress, including Senator Tim Kaine and former Congresswoman Barbara Comstock. Additionally, our Innovator program won the U.S. Congressional App Challenge Award last year. As part of BranchOut's goal to promote civic engagement, community, and STEM education, we're extremely glad to have you with us today. The marine biology industry will and always has been an important part of our modern society. I'm sure you will provide excellent information regarding the industry for all of us, and we wanted to thank you for showing up today. First, if you wouldn't mind just briefly introducing yourself, your name, where you work, any fun facts, and yeah, we'll just start with that.
So thank you for having me. Since I write my own job description, part of my job description is outreach to people that are interested in marine biology. I work at Duke University. I'm the Norman Christensen Professor of the Environment. And I come from the University of Michigan, and I'm trained as a terrestrial ecologist and as a cancer biochemist.
Thank you. It's very nice to meet you. Now, let's begin with some of our questions. So the first question I have for you today is, how did you get into marine biology? And how did you know that it was what you want to do for a living? Please share any specific experiences that might have influenced your choice.
That's a really complex question. I finished my PhD on frogs in 1975. And while I was doing that, I worked in a cell biology lab for fun. And I worked in the field with a crustacean behaviorist named Brian Hazlett, who's from marine systems, for fun. I like science. And after I finished my PhD, I went down to the Florida Keys where Hazlett was on sabbatical for a year and visited him in Big Pine Key. And that was my first real exposure to the ocean. And it was just so cool. I'm used to fresh water, and the first thing I noticed in marine environments was everything you touched cut you. The second thing I noticed was that I shouldn't touch things that don't move, that can move, because more than likely they can defend themselves. I'll give you an example. I was snorkeling and I was under a bridge, and I went down about 4 feet, and there was this big fish, normal kind of shaped fish, beautiful, huge eyes, and it swam into a crack. And I had a goodie bag with me, and I thought, oh, I'll catch that fish. So I reached into the crack to catch the fish, and it puffed itself up and filled up the crack. And when it was doing that, these spines about this long came off its entire body. In my hand that was over the top of the fish, the spines went into my hand. and I could see this greenish stuff coming out of my hand. So I pulled my hand out. I realized this fish knew what it was doing and that I didn't know what I was doing. And then I went up to the surface and I breathed for a little bit, being grateful that I could get my hand out so I didn't drown because I was stuck underwater, and thought, oh, that stupid fish. Now all I have to do is I can reach my finger in and grab him by the gills, pull him out of the crack, and stick him in my goodie bag. So I went to do that. And when I reached for the fish's gills, it went and bit me. And it had really sharp, not teeth, but just jaws. It was a big puffer fish. And then I realized that I shouldn't play with that. But I was hooked on marine systems. And it took that was about 1975. It took until 1980 for me to get my first job after my PhD working in marine systems, and I was at the University of Delaware. And I've worked in marine systems ever since.
Wow, thank you so much for the inspiring statements. And also the experience sounded just really cool and interesting, but also it probably was a bit scary at the time, but I think that's something so cool about marine biology is that you're always learning. And then that's a really cool way to develop your passion for your science. Okay. For our second question, now touching on the work that you've done, some of your main research focal points have been centered around ecology and conservation in regards to organisms in the water. Do you mind explaining or giving a brief overview of your main areas of work or your most recent studies in regards to these topics?
Okay, so I work at the interface of chemistry and biology. So what I do is really chemistry from a biological perspective. So a lot of the time I'm a toxicologist. I study molecules that hurt animals. I study molecules that tell animals what to do. I study flavors. If you think about it, flavors and smells are chemistry. I'll give you an example. Plastic is eaten by marine animals because it tastes like food. It looks like food and it tastes like food. It's not what's growing on the surface of the plastic. It's the molecules that are actually leaching out of the plastic that have flavor. And there's more flavor in a hunk of plastic. And you know this if you've ever sucked on anything plastic. There's more flavor in a hunk of plastic than there is in chewing gum. If I give a piece of plastic to an enemy, which can't see and can only taste and smell and feel, it'll suck on the plastic for up to 6 hours. And if you think about it, your gum only lasts about 30 minutes. So I do lots of work on molecules that make animals do things and molecules that impact animals.
Okay, thank you so much. That honestly sounds really interesting, when you actually think about it and flavor and things, and also your description about plastic and the relationship to marine animals and chemistry and stuff. It just sounds really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Okay, our third question is, I also noticed that you are an active participant of an anti-fouling program in Singapore. Could you tell us what exactly is anti-fouling and how is it impacting our aquatic environments?
Okay, so actually, I've worked in anti-fouling for the U.S. Navy Office of Naval Research since 1982. Okay, I'm a barnacle farmer. Biofouling is organisms growing on man-made surfaces where man doesn't want them. So animals like barnacles growing on ship hulls, what grows on pilings, what grows on plastic that gets stuck in the ocean. Give you an example, little plastic water bottles, if they float in the ocean, one of the additives in those little bottles is an endocrine disruptor, which it disrupts endocrine systems in humans and other vertebrates. But it's also mimics a settlement pheromone for algae. So algae specifically settles on those plastic bottles because of the molecules that are leaching from them. Okay. So biofouling is the growth of things on surfaces. I grow an animal model, all life stages of barnacles. Barnacles grow on ship hulls. They look like little volcanoes. They have a larval stage. They have several larval stages. If you think about it, barnacles are arthropods. Insects are arthropods. And if you think of something like a fly, you know it has maggots that eat and crawl around, and then you have pupae. And if you pick up one of those, it wiggles, and then it pops out and it's a fly. Barnacle larvae swim in the ocean. They eat phytoplankton, they eat algae, and they grow into something called a cyprid. The cyprid finds a place to settle. It glues itself down and turns into the volcano that you're used to seeing. And if that's on a ship hull, then it causes an increase in drag and corrosion. And it's not a pleasant thing for the Navy to have to contend with. Billions of dollars in the form of energy and ship performance happen every year due to things like barnacles and biofouling. So I've studied biofouling for a really long time.
Okay, thank you for the wonderful description. Like before, I probably didn't have as deep of an understanding of really what anti-fouling was, but now that I know like how much of a hassle it is and you know exactly what just like in general how it affects everybody, it was really helpful. And
if you think about it a little bit, the reason that organisms settle on surfaces in the ocean is if they're stuck on the surface, then the water goes by them and they don't have to spend the energy to move the water. So it's easy for them to get rid of waste, and it's easy for them to just stick their feeding appendages out into the flow, which is going by, and catch stuff to eat. So virtually everything that lives on a surface is a filter feeding animal. It eats smaller animals that are going by, and it relieves itself into the ocean, and that's carried away by the water. That's why surfaces are at such a premium. Every surface in the ocean is fouled.
Thank you. Okay. Considering the fact that you are a professor at Duke, how do you help and encourage your students to learn and apply their knowledge? Are there certain unique aspects of teaching marine biology classes that differ from other classes? For example, certain experiments or lab studies you get to do?
Well, first thing I'd say is that there are bunches of different ways to learn. Going to a university exposes you to all different kinds of learning. The kind of learning that I like to do, the kind of teaching and learning that I like to do is what I call experiential learning. And that generally starts out with things that you can hold in your hand and questions you can ask of those things you can hold in your hand. So a lot of the work that I do in the marine environment is with living animals and molecules that make them do things. Okay. So that's different than reading a history book. It's not so different than going out and experiencing history in the field. And it's very concrete, because if you can start with animals you can hold in your hand and watch them behave, you can see them and they're easy to understand. And you can extend that to the chemical level into levels where you can't see and you have to imagine. So I spend a lot of time with students with biological systems and chemistry. And we generally start with something you can hold in your hand, or we do something like one of the experiments we'll do this fall is we'll stick disposable plastic knives on a frame, stick it in the water, and then look at all the different kinds of organisms that settle on that knife, those knives, over time. And if you think about it, things that settle that are biofoulers start out as tiny organisms you can barely see. And then they grow into a reproductive animal like a barnacle. They go from something you can't see to something that's having babies in 3 weeks in nature. So that's really nice because it's really fast. And so if you're a student in a 16-week class, you actually can do an experiment, watch the entire life cycle of the animal, and then figure out what the role of the molecules leaching out of the plastic, what the surface chemistry of the plastic is all about in relation to the animals that grow on it.
Yeah, I could probably agree. One of the reasons why I love learning science is because of all the experiments and how hands-on everything is, and sort of just applying your thinking in sort of a different way rather than just like obviously the ordinary quizzes and tests, but also being able to, conduct lab studies and experiments and really go out in the real world and see, how something might affect another thing. And it's just really cool.
Yeah, and the experiments that I do in my class, if you're used to things like chemistry in high school, physics in high school, you do experiments there. They've all been done before. The experiments that I do with my class routinely have never been done before.
Yeah.
And asking questions of the real world that haven't been answered before. So at the end of the semester, you're an expert on things that no one knows anything about because you've asked those questions. And they're infinite questions you can ask in environments that haven't been asked before.
Thank you. That's just the way you said it. That was so inspiring. And when you think about it, there's always going to be questions and there's always things to explore and things that are unanswered. And I think that's really inspiring for students who want to get into science more or are also interested in sort of just learning about the world in general. Okay. Considering your work on your specific field of marine science, why is learning and understanding marine life important? What greater impacts do you think marine science makes and how it can affect the future?
Okay, well, you might be alive right now. If you're in Virginia, then you've had some really interesting experiences this summer. You've had storms that you're not used to. You might have been lucky and felt an earthquake from the fracking. There are several thousand earthquakes in Pennsylvania a year now due to fracking. If you go to the ocean, you'll see that there's flooding. With a little unluck this fall, we'll get some really gigantic hurricanes. I can tell you that I've worked at the Duke Marine Lab since 1982, and that in the last 5 years, the organisms that live off my dock are totally different than they were when I got here in 1982. They're some of the original animals are still there, but a whole bunch of them are new, and they're new in the last 5 years. As water quality degrades because there are too many people and too much agriculture and too many chemical fertilizers, and as temperatures warm, and you're seeing that if you watch the news, you'll see there are really amazingly warm temperatures this year in the ocean. That doesn't portend well for hurricanes if we happen to get a hurricane. The nice thing is because there's so much more energy in the atmosphere due to climate change, most of the year it's harder to get a hurricane. It's easier to get thunderstorms and hail and stuff like that, but it's hard to get a hurricane because hurricanes need relatively calm conditions to develop. If there's a lot of wind, you shear the hurricane off and it doesn't grow. So watch this fall when conditions change and things calm down for big hurricanes, because a hurricane can get huge in 100-degree temperature water. And if you go to Virginia, is a really good place to look at. You can look at Virginia Beach in Norfolk and watch it sinking. It's sinking twice as fast as most places because after the ice age, the earth is rerounding. So part of that rerounding is causing the tide waters of Virginia to sink at 1 millimeter a year. It's done that for the last 5,000 years, just like where I am. And then sea levels rising normally about 1 millimeter a year. So you guys are getting 2 millimeters where everybody else is getting 1. And with Greenland melting and with those Antarctic starting to melt, sea levels are going up a little bit faster. If we get a lot of calving of the glaciers in Antarctica and in the Arctic, sea levels will rise relatively quickly, and lots of people on the coast are going to have to deal with the surprise of being flooded a lot more frequently.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your cautions and your observations. It's, with all the problems in the world and stuff, I'm sure a lot of people in your industries also share like similar mindsets. But yeah, that's just sort of.
You want to try something really funny? North Carolina has a flounder fishery, so they have a quota that's set by the federal government. North Carolina fishermen have to drive their boats up off New Jersey to catch the flounder because they moved that much further north than they were before. So in order to meet their quota, the North Carolina fishermen have to fish off New Jersey and then bring the fish back to North Carolina to land them. So there are some pretty extreme things every day in maritime industries that are related to climate change. And if you're interested in those kinds of things, and if you're interested in translating science into policy, marine biology is a great place to go to do that, because you have lots of different stakeholders. You have water quality, you've got fisheries, you've got people's livelihoods, you've got communities, and then you have the science, and you've got the big storms and sea level rise. And animals don't understand borders. So where they were isn't where they will be next, because they're going to go where the environmental conditions are correct for them.
Yes, thank you. I guess to end on like a bit of a higher note, lastly, do you have any advice for students that are also interested in marine biology or are interested in a similar form of science? What should they do either in school or outside of school to better understand their science?
Okay, there are bunches of things that you need to do in school. And if you mentioned STEM stuff, if you're interested in any kind of science, you need to have a strong background in STEM. That's math, physics, chemistry, biology, all of those fields. And then you also have to realize that the world you're going into isn't the world of the past. It's the world of the future. So if you think about your education, part of your education is taught into the past. It's the history of science. It's the chemistry that's already been done before that you're learning how to do. It's the language. But another part of that science is the unknown. It's what the future is going to bring, and it's how things work, how the world works. And then once you understand how the world works, you need to translate that into how to make the world work a better way for human beings. And that requires some thought, and it requires education of a lot of different people, and it requires stakeholders to be involved. And if you think about it, the world is really complex, because if you think about something like climate change, only about 60% of the people in the United States think climate change is real. Less than that think it's a problem. And with a political system like the one we have, it's really hard to move forward if people don't agree on the basic facts. And part of what science is fact-driven, and science is knowledge-driven. So figuring out how to do that and how to work with everybody for a better place is a really difficult thing to think about.
Wow, thank you for the
That's a high note.
yeah. Thank you so much for like the inspiring insight, especially somebody on your level and on your understanding of the science world.
All we are is regular people that are
Yeah.
curious about how the world works. We have different rules. We accept that we think we might be right with 95% confidence. If you're a politician, you can lie and be totally wrong, and somehow that's okay. So there's not a level playing field between policy and science. This policy doesn't necessarily have to follow the truth. Okay, so it's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm actually very hopeful. I see hope in the future because lots of people are interested in science, and lots of people are recognizing that there are issues that we have to solve, and lots of young people are getting involved, and I think that's really, really important.
Wow, thank you so much for just sharing your expertise. I love, your inspiring words, and it just touches so many people. And honestly, it really is, very, very true, especially when you think about it, because, even when you might think that you're one person and you're so small, your impact really does make a big difference. So, yeah.
Yeah, especially if you like it.
Yeah.
Follow things that you like and enjoy. You can do really, you don't have to be really good at something. You have to really like it. They're different. A lot of people get pushed into doing what they're really good at when then it's not really fun. Then it's a job, and it's a different way of looking at the world. My job is pretty much my life because it's so much fun for me. One of the things I decided watching my father not like his job was I'd pick a job that was fun for me. And I've done that. So I have a really good time every day. There's still really nasty things in my job, but my day-to-day life is very pleasant because I'm doing things that are really interesting to me, like talking with you. So thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'll just wrap up really quickly with our conclusion. All right, that will just be all the time we have today for questions. We hope that future viewers will get the chance to experience the essence of the field and maybe even be inspired to pursue or learn more about the industry. The marine biology industry has been a vital part of our daily lives and will continue to be for generations to come. If you'd like to learn more about BranchOut and our future panels, please check us out at www.velbranchout.org or like us on Facebook at Veritas Education Leaders. Thank you so much for coming today.